Anniversary. Hi, Facebook.
Hi, Facebook. Do any of you guys have a friend-versary today?
A friend-versary.
Because I do.
That's reason to celebrate.
Well, it's amazing how far you have to scroll down to get to the first thing.
Right. Because there's all this stuff beforehand. They have very much commercialized Facebook.
Yes.
You know how many times I hit the please don't show me any more of these?
Yeah, really. The problem is, what they show you instead is often worse. We be live, childrens. All right.
Hear me and share me.
I'm ready for segment uno. A little bit loud in my phone.
Check. 1, 2. I think I'm okay.
This is amazing because the roles have reversed. Usually you wanted the phone volume turned down just a little more. A little more. Perfect. Thank you. All right. Ready to rock.
Do you want me to call him now before we go live?
No, we'll call him in the break after the first segment because we'll bring him on in the second segment.
Okay.
That's why I wanted to get this first segment underway. So.
Okay. You all ready?
Mm-hmm. Well.
You know, every time I hear that song, I just get insatiably thirsty.
You see, this is the power of suggestive something or other.
That's my Pavlovian response to that.
Welcome, my friends, to this fine radio program. It is called Smokin' and Toastin'. This is show number 94. We are all about craft beer, fine spirits, and hand-rolled cigars. Our show today, we are stealing the title from the title of the book whose author we'll be interviewing. It's called Barrel-Aged Stout and Selling Out. It is the story of Goose Island, Anheuser Busch, and the craft beer industry. And it is fascinating. I actually just finished the book yesterday, and I'm like, I'm almost bummed that I finished it because I was enjoying reading it so much. So we'll get to that. We'll be talking with Josh Noel. He will be our special guest. He is a columnist for the Chicago Tribune. Writes about food and beer and other tasty topics. And Josh Noel has spent quite a bit of time working on this book, and it has just been released. And I think it was really eye opening for me about some things, and I really enjoyed reading it. So we're really looking forward to talking to Josh on this show.
And it's going to be super exciting. The book was, I was expecting it to be a bit more of a dry read.
And it's not at all, is it?
It's not at all. It's incredibly engaging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is.
Incredibly engaging.
And if you're even remotely, you don't have to be a total beer nerd, I think.
No.
In fact, my wife is reading it and loving it, and she only drinks the occasional beer.
Well, I can't wait to talk to him about it because I have so many questions. There's so many, underhanded, bizarre things going on
I know.
behind the scenes. And it explained a lot to me.
Yes.
Especially about, the distribution side. It was fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely great. So he's going to be on the show, and then as promised, we'll be airing some of your filed reports from Ybor City from when you were in Florida.
That's going to be fun because I got some a couple of surprise drinks. I think that you'll find entertaining.
I'm really looking forward to finding out what you were up to out there. So we're going to be tasting 3 different Goose Island beers today. Since Goose Island's the topic of the book, I thought it might do us good to check in on some of the Goose Island brews now that they are brewed and have been brewed for some time under Anheuser-Busch AB InBev watchmanship, and see if they still hold up. See if they're still as good as they once were. So we'll be tasting the Honkers Ale, which was the first one to take off in Chicago. Not nearly as big there anymore because it was supplanted as their sort of big beer, their Shiner Bock, if you will, their best known sort of flagship beer. It was supplanted by 312 Urban Wheat Ale, and that's been the big, particularly in Chicago and the Midwest, that's the big seller for Goose Island. And then finally, one of their specialty beers, we'll be tasting the Sofie. And I know you already are a fan of the Sofie.
It's delicious.
Yeah, so we'll be talking about that. We'll see how everything held up. Oh, and guess what else we'll be tasting on the show today?
Let me see.
Here's a clue. Hi, yow.
Oh.
Although that's not from the original version.
Is it going to be
song.
Guns N' Roses?
Yeah, it's Guns N' Roses' new whiskey. No, it's not. It's Bob Dylan's new whiskey. We'll be tasting his Tennessee bourbon, Heaven's Door Tennessee bourbon.
You got to love Guns N' Roses' version of that song because Axl Rose thought to himself, you know what this song needs? A hook. It just doesn't have one.
It was written by, I don't know, possibly the greatest songwriter of all time.
It really needs a
But
hook.
it really needs a hook. Let me put my stamp on it.
Oh, he did. Too.
And believe me, he was successful in that. Oh, man. By the way, the Smoking and Toasting 100th show free-for-all is on the way. Details are coming, but we are very excited about the 100th show, and we're only, like 6 shows away now. So
I saw the email go out, too. I'm pretty
Yep.
excited about that.
It's starting to look good. So, Ian, did you smoke anything interesting this week?
I did. I actually sat up last night and smoked a cigar while I was reading the book we're going to talk about today, which was quite entertaining. You know, like for this job, sometimes when I have to work, that means I have to go outside and have a cigar and read a book.
It's tough. It's a tough life, isn't it?
It was actually work.
Yeah.
It was, one of those things.
You were actually preparing yourself for, for important things. It's, it's a thing,
Yes. So, there we go. Sorry, I'm trying to get my keyboard out of the way on my phone here.
Mm-hmm.
So last night I went out and had a Arroyo Maduro.
Oh, you're looking for that?
Yes, I was because I have it on the title here, but it doesn't display the title on my notes page. So I'd have to go back and figure that out. I didn't want to get into that. So anyway, I had an Arroyo. This is under the CLE family of brands, and the Arroyo Maduro. Let's see here. The size I had was the Toro 54 by 6 CBT Maduro.
This thing looks delicious.
Yeah, this thing's packaged beautiful. Look at the packaging on that. It has a band like a traditional cigar, very nice, classy looking band, and then
the reason we have this is because you brought me one.
Yes,
for which I thank you. And let me just show off the
look how pretty that is.
The packaging is
so
nice.
yeah, and then it has a nice light weight paper, although in black. That says Arroyo all the way down the end to the foot of the cigar.
There you go.
It's just gorgeous packaging. Now the cigar itself, as you can see on the video, there is a dark like chocolate.
Kind of look at the top.
Yeah, like dark chocolate brown. It's a little oily. It's quite oily and toothy, a little leathery in texture. The wrapper. It was a gorgeous cigar. And so my pre-light sniff notes on this, it was very fresh smelling, very barnyard earthiness, kind of light coffee and mocha are what I picked up on the notes when I put it up to my nose. The pre-light draw, I use a punch. That's what I default to. The pre-light draw was effortless. Light, spicy tang to the pre-light draw. Mocha and earth is what I kept getting out of this. I mean, it was really, really nice. A little maybe coffee, maybe mocha. I don't know, somewhere in the middle of that. So the initial light on this, I lit it up. Creamy, smooth smoke. Big, silky smoke. Light spice. And when I tasted the spice, it hits the back of the tongue and the back of the throat just a little bit like cayenne does.
Right.
But in such a nice way, just a very light bit of spice.
Cayenne can be a little overwhelming if you
get
too much of it.
And it had a little of that kind of flavor to it, but not enough to take over everything else. I mean, it was just a kiss of it, And then it had more of that mocha and kind of earthy kind of thing going on.
I like that.
The first third of this cigar, as I was reading my book, it was wonderful. Sitting out there with cat in the lap, I felt like a evil.
Dr. Evil. Yes.
I have this outdoor cat named Attila. She's missing like half of an ear.
That's perfect.
But anyway, so she's sitting in my lap and she's purring away. She drools when she purrs, which is pretty funny. But anyway, so I'm sitting out there with a cigar, petting my cat, reading my book. And so the first third of this, lots of notes of coca, earth, that little touch of cayenne in the back, coffee. The burn was perfect.
Awesome.
And the ash was long and strong.
Nice.
When I got to the second third of this, the ash finally fell off. I didn't encourage it. I was careful with it, but I also didn't want it to fall on me. But the ash finally fell off. It was a third of the cigar long, which is a pretty good size ash. More tangy, earthy spice, more coffee and mocha. Perfect burn.
Wow.
Like, it never even variated from a perfect circle around this thing.
That's awesome.
I got to the third of this, and then the second ash fell. So the second ash was just as long as the first ash, and then the second ash fell, and the mocha and coffee ramps up substantially at this point. Like, it just starts building in flavor.
Nice.
Not really coffee intensity, but building in flavor. The earth and the spice build intensity, and ramp up to a really big, like, pretty amazing cigar. It still was on the high side of a medium cigar at that point in time. It's about a $10, $11 cigar by itself. I'm giving it a solid 6 on this. I enjoyed it tremendously.
Thank you for bringing me one.
Yeah,
I'm so excited to smoke it.
I was excited about it. I was like, you got to have one.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break because when we come back, Josh Noel will be joining us. Josh is a columnist for the Chicago Tribune. He's the author of Barrel Aged Stout and Selling Out, Goose Island, Anheuser Busch, and how craft beer became big business. Boy, do we have questions for him, and we'll be right back with Josh. This is Smoking and Toasting.
Sorry if that was long.
It's okay. I didn't do mine just because I wanted to.
I'll ask you about yours when we get back.
Yep. Actually, we'll do it after the interview because I want to get Josh on the phone.
Well, I meant when we get back to us.
Yep.
It's all about us.
Yeah, and it should be. Except we have
94 episodes.
Yeah, how about that? So,
That's
Adam,
special.
can we go ahead and dial Josh? I have the number. Do you need it?
I have it.
Okay.
Are you doing that already? He's going to be on headphones, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
And this is not a Skype call. This is just a
Yeah, it's just a
voice
phone.
only. Yep. Okay. And do you have to do anything special to bring him up on the board, or is that already there?
Ready, ready. It's ready.
Okay. I don't hear anything so far, so.
Yep.
Oh, you actually have to dial it over there, don't you? I thought maybe you could dial it on the computer.
You have a phone pad on there?
Mm-hmm. Pretty cool, eh?
I assume that device is made specifically for this?
And he can hear us through the mics, right?
Yeah,
Hello?
Josh?
Yeah.
It's Cruz and Ian from Smoking and Toasting. How are you, sir?
Good. How are you doing?
Good, good. Thanks for agreeing to come on the show with us today.
For sure. Happy to do it.
Thank you. We're in a break right now. Of course, this is actually the Facebook Live part of this stays live during the breaks, but we're actually about to start the second segment of the show, and that's where you come in. So if you're ready, we are ready.
I'm ready.
All right, very good.
Fantastic.
All right, we have a little intro music for the segment, and then we'll be on segment 2.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Yep.
Can you turn him up a little bit in my headphone?
Yeah, and maybe turn him up just overall on the
Yeah.
board, unless he looks too hot on the board there.
coming up. He's coming up.
Okay.
Come on.
All right, cool. All right, stand by, Josh. Here we go.
All righty.
All right, ready when you are. Welcome back to Smoking and Toasting. This show is all about craft beer, fine spirits, and hand-rolled cigars. It's show number 94, and we are brought to you by B&B Butchers and Restaurant at 1814 Washington Ave in Houston, and in the shops at Clear Fork in Fort Worth. Without further ado, I'm so excited about our next guest on the show because he's written the book that I probably enjoyed reading more than anything I've read, at least in the last year or so. Please welcome everyone, Josh Noel. Josh, is it Noel or Noel?
No one's ever happy with this answer.
Yeah.
It really, either one is fine.
Either okay. I'm happy. At least now I don't feel like I did it wrong.
Well, it makes it harder to mispronounce anyway.
Bingo, exactly.
Josh, you are a columnist for the Chicago Tribune.
Correct.
And what is your official category as a columnist? I realize you can probably write about whatever you want to, but what do you cover primarily?
You really, at this point, I guess I would be most accurately described as a beer writer. I write about beer from a cultural sense, sort of like what it tastes like and the fun stuff and the trends and things like that, and then also somewhat from a business sense because, breweries opening, breweries closing, it's become a pretty major league industry. So, yeah, I get to dip my toe in a bunch of pools when it comes to the beer.
And so you write for the Chicago Tribune. At some point, you came up with the idea to do this book on the history of Goose Island, how it originated, and in particular, what happened to it and what happened to the whole craft beer industry when it became, I guess it's fair to say, the most notable sale of a craft brewery to a big brewer. Would you agree with that?
I would definitely agree with that. I mean, there have been some of the sales have caused barely a ripple. Some have created, let's say a medium-sized ripple, and then there are the handful of sales that were really meaningful in the beer industry, and the Goose Island sale is certainly one of those because it was the first major acquisition of an American craft brewery by a major beer company, one of the biggies, and it ended up sort of signaling where the industry was going. A whole bunch of deals happened after that. Anheuser Busch, which bought Goose Island in 2011, went on to buy 9 more American craft breweries, plus craft breweries around the world. And then following the Goose Island sale came the other 9, and then Miller got involved, and Heineken got involved, Constellation Brands, which owns Corona and Modelo, they got involved. But the Goose Island sale was really the spark that lit the match, so to speak.
Right.
That was the first hole in the dam.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's really when I knew that there was a book to be written about Goose Island. A book just about, there's this, really good craft brewery in Chicago called Goose Island is a part of a book. Like that unto itself would not be that interesting of a book. Because every brewery has its story. But when Goose sold to Anheuser Busch, that's when I really realized, there's a book-length story to be told here.
Yeah, I was right.
I was actually quite surprised when I sat down and started reading this book. I was expecting it to be basically, okay, this is what happened, list of facts, and things like that. This book was absolutely engaging. Like from beginning, the writing from your side, kudos to you. The writing from your side was fantastic.
I appreciate that.
It really is. It really is a great read. And I read a bit of it poolside, so it even had that sort of sort of a smooth summer read vibe to it. So
I love that. I'm on social media. I'm getting all these tweets of people bringing the book, on their beach vacation, and they're reading it. So it's like, why can't you read about a fascinating beer industry tale at the beach? It doesn't have to just be a thriller or a mystery or whatever.
We mentioned the title of the book in the last segment, Josh, but let me give it again for anybody that's just coming on board here. Barrel-Aged Stout and Selling Out, Goose Island, Anheuser-Busch, and How Craft Beer Became Big Business. How would you, as compared to, say, other industries, how would you compare the rise of craft beer? Has this been like, in terms of its becoming as big a business as it has become? Is this like meteoric? Is it slow compared to other things? What's your take on it?
My take is that it was sort of a slow build, and then it happened all at once.
That's logarithmic, I believe.
I believe you're right. Yeah, logarithmic is what he had said. Yes.
Yeah. For 30-ish years, there was a slow burn of when in the late 70s there were fewer than 100 breweries in the United States. Now there are 6,500 almost.
That's amazing.
And so it built year by year by year, growing, and tastes slowly changed. We used to you were a Bud guy, you were a Miller guy, you were a Schlitz guy. whatever it was, and the way we drank beer and what we wanted just slowly changed. And people wanted variety, they wanted fresh, they wanted local, and we wanted more and more of it. And the options came, and the industry grew. And then as you said, the dam sort of broke with this deal, and that's when it went from this sort of cozy collegial industry to just all bets were off, and it was a new frontier. And it's just and the major beer companies had to get involved. It couldn't just be a mom and pop industry anymore. It was suddenly an industry that the billionaires needed, and that's so they opened up their wallets and they bought their way in.
Similar things happened actually in a lot of other industries, the radio industry, the banking industry, where all of a sudden there would be a moment where the dam broke and where the big guys started coming in and really started to gobble everything up. And what's interesting about your book is that it's not just a one-sided craft beer fans slam of the big guys. You certainly point out where you think they made missteps and what could potentially not be good for craft beer, but I thought it was a really fair telling of the story.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that was the ultimate goal, was to break news, basically to tell a news story, and because I knew there was a lot of stuff still on the table that hadn't been reported yet, that hadn't been unearthed, and I feel like I was pretty fortunate that I was able to get a lot of that, and then to tell an accurate story and to tell a fair story. And, I can sit here and make the argument that, craft beers is, let's put it this way. There's sort of a question, a thread that ran through the book that sort of kept coming up was, has craft beer won or has craft beer lost?
Right.
And some people argue that craft beer won because it forced big beer to change. Craft beer made people drink beer differently, and big beer had to get involved. Big beer had to have an IPA in its tanks. It couldn't just be Bud and Bud Light anymore. And then there's the argument that craft beer lost because now you have big beer poised to become the dominant producer of craft beer in the United States. So I think both arguments are there to be made, and I wanted the book to sort of let the reader decide for him or herself, where they fall in it. And I just wanted to sort of give them all the tools. And you know what? Big beer doesn't want you to have all the tools. Anheuser-Busch doesn't want you to know that Goose Island beer is most often made in the same tanks as Bud and Bud Light. They want it to still speak as this Chicago brand. And you guys are dealing with it down there with Karbach.
Yeah, absolutely.
They don't really want... They want Karbach to stand on its own and speak for itself as a Houston brand. They don't want it to be known as an Anheuser-Busch brand. So my intention with the book was to definitely sort of connect some dots that the big beer companies don't necessarily want to be connected on your behalf, but then for you to decide what it means.
Pull the curtain back a little.
Is it good? It's bad. That's to be determined by each consumer and how they spend their money.
So one of the interesting, you mentioned Karbach, because we have Karbach here in town. A couple things I noticed, just going from what you said in the book about Goose Island and versus the Karbach thing. Goose Island had established themselves pretty big and even more regionally before they really got the attention of AB InBev. Karbach was bought before they got quite that big, like as if they were looking ahead. The other thing that I noticed too is in the book you mentioned that Goose Island decided they wanted to brew a Pilsner, and AB InBev said no way.
Right.
You're a lager, sorry, not a Pilsner. And they said,
yeah, well, I think it was a.
Oh, was it? And they said absolutely no way because that's going to be a direct competition. The first beer that got dropped when Karbach was taken over was their sympathy for the lager.
Got dropped in terms of
they stopped making it.
They took it off the market.
They took it off the market, and what a great beer that was.
Although, in fairness, there was very little similarity between Sympathy for the Lager and a Budweiser. I mean, Sympathy for the Lager was brown and malty and had all this character to it. I just don't think those two beers would have ever appealed to the same drinker.
I just wonder if because they were shooting for that same market, if that might have been a point there.
Well, I think Anheuser. So initially, Anheuser-Busch, the first couple of years that they owned Goose Island, they had no idea what to do with it. They had really no idea what craft beer was at that point. And those were the days when they were saying Goose Island will never make a large-scale Pilsner or any kind of lager because that's what we do, and we don't want you competing with us. Bud and Bud Light are our flagships, and you're this little, cute thing off in the corner.
Right.
They have since learned. AB has learned a lot. They've gotten a lot savvier with their understanding of craft beer, and have come to realize that, yes, craft beer companies need to make Pilsners. They need to make lagers. People want that, and they don't compete with Budweiser and Bud Light. They're their own proposition, really. As far as the Karbach thing, I'm guessing that they didn't kill that beer for any insidious reasons, such as competing with Bud and Bud Light. My guess is that they're all in on what's the flagship? It's probably an IPA from Karbach, right?
It's Hopadillo and Love Street are probably the two big.
Right. Is Love Street a Kolsch?
Yes,
it's easy drinking, right?
It's a very light Kolsch, but it's got some flavor profile to it, so it's pretty interesting.
They probably just calculated that those two beers were really, where consumer interest lies. But so you made a good point, though. Goose Island was very well established when AB bought them, and I think with Karbach, what they were doing was it was a regional play. I mean, Houston is fourth biggest city in the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's I would assume a very large and growing craft beer market, and it's you look at a map and you look at sort of the demographics and the trends. That's a darn good place to own a brewery. A lot more attractive than Little Rock.
Right.
Nothing against Little Rock.
Yeah.
And so I think that had a lot to do with AB's interest in a brewery like Karbach.
Texas came a bit late to the craft beer party, but once it really, and now of course we've had St. Arnold and Shiner, of course, have both been around for quite a while. But in terms of the state really opening up to craft beer, I think it was a little late to the party, but once it hit, it accelerated like crazy. And I'm guessing, and I'm sure they've got stats on all of this, but at the time they took over Karbach, they probably were looking at Texas as one of the faster growing, and certainly a very populous area, one of the faster growing places for craft beer. So I could see where it was attractive to them. What I found interesting is, from your perspective as the writer of the book, the Karbach sale really only gets mentioned, marginally in the book. It doesn't get nearly as much ink in the book as some of the other breweries that AB took over, not including Goose Island. Was that because in Chicago you weren't really feeling the ripple, feeling the backlash the same way that, let's say, you did for Wicked Weed?
Yeah, well, we don't get Wicked Weed. We don't get either brewery distributed here. We probably will eventually. I mean, AB buys these breweries to grow them. But the reason Wicked Weed just reverberated that sale so much more nationally than Karbach. It's really the Karbach sale was among those that probably generated the least amount of reaction. I think that's just because it was a younger brewery in as you say, a more developing craft beer market.
There was
Wicked Weed was. Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying there was some pushback here locally. A number of the very craft friendly bars and restaurants took it off of the menu, but it also then started showing up everywhere else. And so in that sense, the AB strategy really worked. What they lost in terms of taps and good graces of the people, they probably made up for a number of times over just in how many new taps they got. And I can't tell you how many places I go in that are not necessarily beer specialty places, and I'll say, what do you have that's an IPA? And they go, oh, we have Hopadillo. And I'll say, well, do you have anything else? No, we have Hopadillo. So they have Bud Light, Miller Lite, and Hopadillo. And that's and there's not that there's anything wrong with Hopadillo. It's certainly not my favorite IPA, but it's
and it also works against the idea of consumer choice. Right?
Well, that's right.
I mean, and that's one of the complaints that certain onlookers, such as the Brewers Association, which is the represents more than 4,000 craft brewers trade group, Coast to Coast. They're based in Colorado, and they've been at the forefront of trying to bring attention to Anheuser-Busch's craft strategy and what they argue. And you just told a story that shows that their argument has some merit, is that in certain ways the big beer push into craft beer, and especially Anheuser-Busch's, because Anheuser-Busch is the biggest of big beer, it winds up being limiting consumer choice, and it's anti-competitive.
Well, they've gone from they've gone from you will drink our crappy beer to you will drink our craft beer.
Yeah, you will drink our crappy beer or our better beer. Josh,
exactly, and in some cases, the better beer it inches toward the crappy. I'm sorry to say, like the Goose Island beer that's made in AB tanks now, just isn't as good as what it was when it was made in Chicago. Is the truth of it.
Now, it's really interesting that you say that, because we normally taste 3 beers on every show, and this week we're tasting. We don't usually taste 3 from the same brewery unless that brewery is being on as a guest. But today we are going to be tasting 3 Goose Island beers, including the 312 Urban Wheat and the Honkers Ale. But we don't necessarily have the same sort of perspective. We're going to taste the Sofie as well. I was looking for Matilda, but I couldn't find it anywhere here in Houston. But in any case, we don't have the same sort of perspective and background as you to compare, say, a Honkers Ale now to what it tasted like back in the day in Chicago before AB was part of the picture.
Yeah. Well, so the 312, and you'd never really know this from just holding the beers in your hand, but that 312 Urban Wheat Ale is literally made in the same tanks where Anheuser-Busch makes Bud and Bud Light.
Right.
That beer is, I can say with confidence, is a shell of what it used to be.
Wow. Do you think to the same degree as Rolling Rock? Like, I thought that beer went way downhill.
Yeah, I gotta be honest, I don't remember Rolling Rock being that good before.
Okay, that's a fair point.
But it did. I mean, it did. They picked up, and that was a huge thing. Anheuser-Busch bought Rolling Rock. Though to be fair, this was the old Anheuser-Busch before it had been acquired by InBev,
right?
Which then became Anheuser-Busch InBev. Yeah, Rolling Rock was a huge PR disaster for Anheuser-Busch. But yeah, I mean, in some ways you can argue something similar is happening here. So that 312 Urban Wheat Ale, is made by Anheuser-Busch. Again, not that you'd ever know it from looking at the label. The Honkers Ale was made by Anheuser-Busch, and that beer has fallen so far out of favor that they actually stopped making it, and now it's made back in Chicago again. So if you have an older bottle, it was probably made by Anheuser-Busch. If it's a newer bottle, it could be one that's made in Chicago. And actually, I can tell you what to look for on the label.
Okay, hang on. I'm gonna grab it while you do.
Okay. And the Sofie is actually, so Sofie is an example, a happy story, still made in Chicago. And last I had it, I got to be honest, I haven't had it in a few months, or maybe a year even. It was still pretty darn good beer. So that's one that Anheuser-Busch really hasn't messed with.
That's still made in Chicago. So, they didn't really.
Sofie is.
Yeah, they didn't really mandate any changes or force it to be made in Bud Light tanks or anything like that, right?
Well, yeah, and that would just never work. I mean, a beer like that is, you'll taste it and see. It's a different proposition altogether. And they don't want the yeast that's in Sofie in anywhere near the Bud and Bud Light.
Right. Josh, I've got my a bottle of the Honkers here. What am I looking for to see if it's an old bottle or a no bottle?
So turn it on its side and look for a location where it's made in the fine print. Mm-hmm. It's going to say, it'll probably say Chicago, but then the question is, does it also say Baldwinsville, New York, and or Fort Collins, Colorado, any other locations? And again, this is the fine print on the side of the bottle. Mm-hmm. It's sort of the legalese stuff. Do you see a location on there? It
says Goose Island Beer Company, Chicago, Illinois.
And that's it?
And that's it in that area. I'm just looking to see if it's anywhere else on the label. Because I did see, it was on the 312, where it has other locations listed as well.
Right.
Exactly. So that's the giveaway on all these Anheuser-Busch made craft beers is, so the Honkers you have was made in Chicago.
Okay.
Because that is now the only place they're making it again.
It'll be interesting. It'd be interesting. And again, we don't have the perspective that you have of how it might compare to what Honkers tasted like when it was originally made in Chicago.
Yeah, and the truth with Honkers is that it's a hard beer to make, and it's a hard beer to make well. Some batches turn out better than others. So your taste buds won't lie. It could be a great batch, and even though it's made in Chicago, it could not be a great batch.
Right.
So the 312 has multiple locations. It says Fort Collins, Colorado, and Baldwinsville,
Yep.
New York.
That's right.
And those are Anheuser Busch breweries.
Mm-hmm.
And if it has multiple locations on it, and this goes for any AB brand, then that means it was made by Anheuser Busch at one of those massive breweries where they also make Bud and Bud Light. And at some point, if they haven't already, they're going to probably scale up Karbach too, and they'll probably start making Karbach in Fort Collins or Baldwinsville or one of those places.
Yeah, I could see that.
So if you want to
happening.
know if your Karbach is made locally or if it's made by Anheuser Busch, do that exact same thing. Turn the bottle on its side or the can, look at the very, very fine print, and see, does it have multiple locations named, or does it just say Houston, Texas?
Josh, if one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, if it hadn't been Goose Island, if John Hall had ultimately said no, where do you think the dam would have wound up bursting? Who would it have been?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't know the answer, of course, but I think your question makes a very important point that if it hadn't been Goose Island, it would have been someone else.
Right.
Someone was going to go first. Goose Island sold for $38.8 million. Now we see breweries more routinely selling for, in the $150 to $250 million range.
Mm-hmm.
In a couple isolated cases, we saw a $1 billion sale. So people, will say, "Oh, I can't believe Goose Island sold for so little." And what I usually say to them is someone had to go first.
Right.
And it was Goose Island, and valuations were lower then. And Goose Island, as you saw in the book, Anheuser Busch made a lot of mistakes with them because they were first. And if it hadn't been them, Anheuser Busch was knocking on a lot of doors. They were looking at Long Trail in Vermont. They were looking at Boulevard in Kansas City. They were looking at New Belgium and Fort Collins, Colorado at a certain point. And none of those worked. I don't think any of those breweries wanted it to be them either. But if it hadn't been Goose, it would have been someone.
Do you think Goose Island would have survived had they not sold and had the cash infusion? Because they were struggling with how to manage their growth.
Yeah, but they were growing like crazy. I mean, what they needed was new equipment and to grow more. But Goose Island was thriving at the time of their sale. They could not make enough beer to keep up with demand. But they did have a problem. They had a brewery making far more beer than it should be making, and they were having to make, I think 80% of production was at 312 Urban Wheat Ale that you're about to drink, or the old version of it. And they wanted to be able to make more beer and more different kinds of beer, and so they had a problem they needed to solve. And Anheuser-Busch was solved a lot of those problems by being able, who has more equipment at the ready than Anheuser-Busch?
Yeah, right.
So they were able to solve the problem for Goose Island. But, they also sort of uncorked some new problems for Goose Island at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. In your opinion, Josh, how would you say ultimately Chicago has been about this? Has Chicago, would you say overall, sort of forgiven Goose Island? Is it still a thing to the degree that it was, or close to the degree that it was? Or would you say that it may still be selling well, but isn't revered in the same way in Chicago?
I'd say it is not revered in the same way in Chicago. I think it is. Certainly it is respected and it is appreciated, and I don't think there's any hard feelings against John Hall, the founder, for selling. I think plenty of people don't like the decision he made, but he also earned the right to make that decision, and I don't think anyone doubts that. But Goose Island had a really rough 2017 in Chicago. Sales of its flagship beer, Goose Island IPA, were way down. Sales of 312, which used to just own this town, we're way down. I mean, we're talking like down 30-40%.
What's replacing it when in places where the sales are down? What are people drinking instead? Is it just a combination of everything?
Yeah, I mean, and that's so that you sort of got to like the part of it. So it's not all necessarily on Goose Island's shoulders. It's not even all Goose Island's fault. They were at the top, and when you're at the top, you got nowhere to go but down, right? And yeah, there's more and more competition, and people are, tastes have just fragmented all over the place, and people are drinking all sorts of beers at all different times and experimenting and looking for what's new. And Goose Island IPA is about as uninteresting as IPA gets, and IPA is just filled with fascinating propositions left and right. And people want local, they want fresh, they want, they like the sort of the intimacy vibe of walking into a smaller brewery, being able to talk to the brewer, see where the beer's made, and walk out with a 4-pack that was, canned yesterday. And Goose Island just doesn't offer that anymore. Their main rival is here now is called Revolution Brewing, which is a very fast-growing brewery. Funny enough, started by a former Goose Island brewer. And Revolution's flagship beer is called Anti-Hero IPA.
Nice.
And that beer has supplanted Goose Island IPA as
Good for them.
The city's top seller. So, yeah.
So one of the interesting points I found, and this was early in the book, where you were talking about how Big Beer was treating their customers. It was amazing. You pointed out that they're expecting their customer to drink the same beer every time, every day, all day. And no one eats that way. Like, people were so craving different flavors and didn't even realize it at some point, Yep,
yeah.
One of the...
Exactly. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say, yeah, I mean, that was really the catalyst for everything that happened with craft beer. Yeah, we went through a stretch where... taste homogenized really in every direction. I mean, I say in the book that, if breakfast was cornflakes, soup was Campbell's, bread was Wonder.
Right.
And we just sort of, and then we got out of that with food first, and then it happened with wine. California wine industry grew up. Coffee, Starbucks started, and then sort of beer came last.
Right.
But it was, looking back, it's sort of a no-brainer. I mean, as a nation, we love beer. And why shouldn't there be diversity? Why should all beer taste the same and we drink the same thing every time we want a beer? As you say, we don't eat every time we're hungry. We don't eat the same thing, right? And craft beer just tapped into that, and yeah, sure enough, the people, when presented with options and flavor and diversity and freshness, people said, yeah, this is a pretty good idea.
Josh Noel writes about beer for the Chicago Tribune, and he is the author of what I think we both think is just an excellent book called Barrel Aged Stout and Selling Out, Goose Island, Anheuser Busch, and How Craft Beer Became Big Business. Josh, 2 more quick questions for you if you have the time. The first is that in the book you make the point, actually at several places in the book, about how Big Beer, AB InBev in particular, has learned a lot from the process of acquiring craft beer. You also point out the Super Bowl ad where they basically kind of, mocked craft consumers at the same time they were, working on buying Goose Island. Does it feel like they've learned that lesson at all? Because this whole Bud Light Dilly Dilly campaign that came out last year was the same exact thing. It was basically calling craft beer fans and people who wanted something interesting and diverse in what they were drinking, off to the dungeon with you. Like you don't even know what's good was the whole point of that whole ad campaign. Did that surprise you that they went back to insulting craft again?
No, I'll never be surprised by that. They're the truth is they're a massive company with a lot of competing interests under one roof. So, I think there's occasionally the Bud guys will do something that they see as in their interest that will maybe tick off the craft guys a little bit. That's just going to happen. So, the irony of the Dilly Dilly thing is that the Bud Light brand is now being run by a guy named Andy Goehler, who's an Anheuser-Busch lifer, but before he was running Bud Light, he was running Goose Island. So
you talk to him. Yeah, you talk about him a lot in the book.
Yeah, he's in there. It's just there's a certain sort of insincerity when Anheuser-Busch talks about how deeply they respect craft beer and want to be part of it, because the entire organism that is Anheuser-Busch InBev, parts of it disdain craft beer and the threat that it represents to those huge legacy brands. But that doesn't mean that certain parts of the 12-headed monster aren't sincere in their appreciation of craft beer. I think it gets complicated because there's so many competing agendas within the one company. Though of course, ultimately, at the end of the day, it does funnel back to one agenda, which is the stock price,
right,
and the executives getting their $1 million
hitting their bonuses. Yep.
So,
it's all about.
At the end of the day, it does all funnel back to there.
It's all about this quarter and hitting the bonus.
Mm-hmm.
Josh, final question: is there anything that you are drinking right now that you thought was notably and particularly good of any brand? Anything you've tried that you've been very impressed with of late, a beer or two?
Well, I would mention the one thing I've been most enjoying this summer, but it wouldn't do you much good because it's from a tiny brewery here in Chicago, and the odds of finding it in Houston are about zero.
Well, at the same time, we do have listeners all over the place, and I'm in Chicago more often than you might think. So,
okay. Well, I will say that this summer, a little brewery up here called Spiteful Brewing just released a brand new beer called Spiteful Lager. So it is a 4.7% lager. It's a bright, clean, wonderful summer beer. But it's really it's incredibly refreshing and drinkable, but also really interesting without being sort of showy. To me, it's the perfect summer beer.
Perfect balance.
Nice.
Balance and just really interesting. But at the end of the day, you can also just turn your brain off, not think about it, and just drink it on repeat and enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And it's lower alcohol, so you can also drink a few in the hot sun and not fall over. It actually would play really well down in Houston.
Yeah, I
bet. So if anyone's in Chicago, check out Spiteful Lager. It's just a lovely,
Lager,
very easy drinking beer.
Very nice. Well, Josh, I can't thank you enough for being on the show, but also just for writing this book. I think it was almost like a love letter to craft beer fans that have felt like I guess I understand what happened, but I don't really understand what happened. And to me, like, your ability in the book to kind of fill in those gaps and tell the stories behind it, and the way that you describe the people involved. You don't wind up being mad at John Hall and Greg Hall when you read the book, but sometimes you go, oh gosh, I just wish they'd made some different decisions. But that's how I think the book is really well balanced. It was
very poignant and not judging.
Yeah, not preachy. Yeah, for
not
sure.
Preachy.
For sure. And we appreciate that. We often say on this show, isn't it really about what's in the bottle? But there is more to it than that. And, we recognize that. So,
in some ways, that's the exact line that the big beer companies
exactly
are trumpeting is, hey, just think about what's in the bottle. Just think about what's in the glass. Don't think about who's actually making it or how it got into your bottle or your glass.
Or Soylent beer.
So, yeah, I mean, there's both sides. But I really appreciate all your feelings on the book. It's wonderful to hear, and I'm glad it resonated with you, and I'm glad it was meaningful, and I really appreciate you having me on to chat about it.
If you are in Houston anytime, the beers are on us, and we can find some really good ones. Trust us.
That sounds good. Yeah, I'd love to come down there and do a reading, and I like your town. I think it's a cool city. So hopefully, let's make that happen.
It's become quite a place for beer, I would say, in the last 2 to 3 years. Mm-hmm. If you were here more than 2 or 3 years ago, you would not recognize it as a beer town. It's really become craft crazy down here. So it's pretty awesome. Josh, thank you so much. Josh Noel, or Noel,
Yep.
the columnist for the Chicago Tribune. He's the author of Barrel Aged Stout and Selling Out, Goose Island, Anheuser Busch, and How Craft Beer Became Big Business. If you are even marginally interested in beer, read the book. It's a great read. Josh, thank you very much.
Thank you, fellas.
Awesome.
Take care.
All right, it's Smoking and Toasting. We are brought to you by B&B Butchers and Restaurant at 1814 Washington Ave in Houston and in the shops at Clear Fork in Fort Worth, Texas. And we will be right back and do a little Goose Island tasting right after this.
Man, that was awesome.
Did you think it was good?
That was downright fun. Yeah, I really did enjoy the read on that. It was made me break out my Kindle. I've been doing so much listening.
Right. If you're going out, will you grab the opener off the fridge?
Yes.
How long was that segment? Was it more than 20? Hey, how you doing?
Need
a blue bag.
I think it was like 36, 37. It was about 37 minutes.
Yeah, he was wanting the bag.
Sorry about that.
Who's hearing me, Bruce?
About 30,
37.
37. Holy moly.
Yeah.
Our longest segment ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was taking a little bit. I just put it on your chest.
Ah.
So that was about 37 minutes, our longest segment ever.
Ooh. Well, I'm glad he was there for that.
Yeah. Well, while we had him, it made sense. So we might
That went by faster than I thought.
we
too.
might consider that 2 and 3.
It was 37 minutes and 11 seconds.
So let's consider that 2 and 3, and we'll just do 4 and 5. So let's taste 2 Goose Islands
And
here.
we still have those things that.
Yep. We'll taste 2 Goose Islands here. We'll watch one of the. We'll do. How long are the 2 that we have? The video inserts.
One is. I'll tell you right now. You're not too long.
If they're too long, we might have to just do one.
One is 4 minutes.
Okay.
The other is 5 minutes.
All right. Let's get the 4 minute. Does it matter which one we see first?
Doesn't matter to me.
All right. Let's do the 4 minute first.
Okay, you want to start that off?
Not right at the beginning, but we'll get to it pretty quick.
The one of them, I probably introduce him a little more at the beginning, but
That might be the 5 minute one. You think?
maybe
Maybe we should start with the 5 minute.
I'm not sure, but just
Either way, they're pretty casual.
Okay. Yeah.
It's not like too.
yeah.
I'll give you a chance to set it up too before we go to each one. So, all right, here we go. This will be the equivalent. It'll be segment 3, but it'll be the equivalent of segment 4.
That means we're gonna come in.
I liked when it was.
Yeah, I was trying to recreate that, but it wasn't working.
Alright, you ready?
Uh-huh. Welcome back to Smoking and Toasting.
Oh yeah.
It's the program that's all about craft beer, fine spirits, and hand-rolled cigars. We are brought to you by B&B Butchers and Restaurant at 1814 Washington Ave in Houston and in the shops at Clear Fork in Fort Worth. Thank you to Josh Noel, the columnist for the Chicago Tribune
Noel.
and the author of Barrel Aged Stout and Selling Out, for being on the show. Very interesting guy and a wonderful book. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's so engaging. I was just amazed at how good it was. And what a great interview!
Yes.
That guy was.
No, he was a fabulous.
He was
interview.
right on.
So I will tell you, I've just opened up the Goose Honkers Ale. As Josh pointed out, because of the labeling, we can tell that this is Honkers Ale that is now made back at the Goose Island Brewery in Chicago. So Honkers started out as Goose Island's first hit, back when they were essentially a Chicago and only in the surrounding area type brewery. Honkers was their first runaway hit. It was their Shiner Bock, for lack of a better way to describe it.
Right.
People in the Texas area would understand that it was their flagship beer. It was slowly supplanted by Goose 312 Urban
312,
Wheat Ale, which we will actually try next. That happened for a couple of reasons. First of all, they identified that after a period of time, Honkers was appealing to the people who had liked it when it first came out, but it hadn't really grabbed the youth, the younger drinker, and so 312 was targeted a little younger with the packaging and the way it was, and also Honkers took a lot longer to brew, was a lot harder to brew, and 312 helped Goose brew more beer of the right quality, and when it became the city's favorite Goose Island beer, it became a real win for them financially, because they could produce a lot more of it a lot faster just because of the way it was brewed.
One of the things I loved about that book as well was just the story behind each one of these iconic brews.
Yes,
was pretty amazing, because they talk about how they came about and how like this was John's favorite.
Honkers Ale
was John's favorite,
and to the end of the book, even what he would have when he would go down to the tap room
was a Honkers Ale. And but the 312, and one of my favorite parts about when he talks about the 312 is they put it in front of a panel, and all the young people got what it meant. The 312 Urban Wheat Ale got that. None of the old people got it. Like, after 40 years old, no one got what it meant. They were like, what is this?
312, by the way, is the area code in Chicago, or one of the area codes in Chicago.
Yes.
So it'd be the Houston equivalent of naming the beer 713.
Right.
And when AB InBev was buying Goose, they actually went out into different areas and trademarked, like I'm sure they trademarked 713 in Houston, and they trademarked, and in fact, that is where one of the beers we've really enjoyed recently here came from, and it was 805. Which is Firestone Walker's beer in California.
That was a great story, because
Firestone Walker got wind of what was so happening, and they rushed a beer to market called 805, and it has wound up becoming their flagship beer.
And I didn't look into it, but the 412 in Austin.
No, 512.
Or 512, sorry, 512 in Austin. Obviously, they didn't get that from.
That's the brewery name, though, not the actual
okay.
individual beer. Because 512 has a pecan porter and a number of other. They also have an IPA that's pretty darn good. So Goose Honkers Ale, when it was bigger and when the brewery was first purchased by AB InBev, they moved production of it to St. Louis, where it was made in the same tanks as Bud Light. But it has kind of fallen out of favor, not selling the way that it used to. And so now it's been moved back to being produced in Chicago. And I've actually had this beer before and felt like I liked it quite a bit.
I've had it before, and I don't know what version of it I've had before, because it's been quite a while. I'm assuming it was after InBev took over, and it wasn't recently, so it was probably when InBev was brewing it outside of Chicago. And I remember thinking, meh.
Yeah,
whatever. This is drinkable. It's got a nice flavor profile. It doesn't make me go wow.
I like the maltiness to it.
The maltiness I do like, and there's a slight bitter finish that I also enjoy. And I assume
if you're looking for the hoppiness of an IPA, it's not there. If you're looking for the maltiness of, say, a brown ale or something like that, it's not there. So
right, it's somewhere in the middle. And to me, this feels like a few compromises. It's not undrinkable by any means. It's not bad. It just doesn't have a lot of depth of character to it.
Well, I can see where this became something that was important to them to get out in Chicago, because in the early days of Goose Island, they were having to win their customers over, not people who were already craft brewery drinkers, but people who were ordering Budweiser and Miller Lite.
I can see, if I would have walked in and you had Budweiser and you had this, I can see where I would enjoy this tremendously compared to
exactly.
that.
And it's a good sort of a gateway beer.
Yeah, it's a solid brew. Like I said, it doesn't wow me. But then again, that might be because my palate is used to. I love huge brews overall. Mm-hmm. I do like the malty flavor on it. Mm-hmm. I just wish I had more of it.
We'll get to the 312 in a minute, but there's so much to do on the show. And I really wanted you to talk a little bit about this video clip that we're going to see that was one of the Ian on the Move reports filed from Ybor City in Florida when you were there a couple of weeks ago.
So while in Ybor City, we wandered up and down. We had cigars. We talked to a bunch of people. We had a great time. But we ended up in this place called Rock Brothers Brewery, and it was right there, right off, block off of the Strip in Ybor City. And we were hanging out and they actually didn't have a whole lot of their brews in stock at the time. They weren't ready. They had a bunch of guest taps and things like that. And so we just got chatting. But one of the bartenders started making this drink, and I noticed that my wife she loves mixed drinks, and she was captivated. And when I see that look on her face, I know something's about to happen, okay? Because my wife's a little bit like wind her up, watch her go. Mm-hmm. If you've ever met my wife, you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, so the next thing I know, I smell smoke in a good way, but smell smoke, and I look down at the end of the bar, and this bartender has this crazy concoction going on with all this craziness. My wife is staring at this going, I have to have one of those. So I said, okay. And immediately, Roy was the bartender's name. So Roy, my wife has to have one of these. So he comes over and he prepares this. This is an experience. It's not just a mixed drink, okay?
Right.
So he comes over and he prepares this thing, and it was amazing to watch him do. He was entertaining. He was fun. So I said, you know what? I want to get you doing that on camera. I want to show our audience this because we had talked a little bit about the show. I want to show our audience this. So we did this. And I made an appointment for him. Came back on Friday when he had a pretty empty bar, and we could take a little time to do this. So we're going to go ahead and play that clip right now. I'm not sure. He did 2 different drinks. I'm not sure which clip you're about to play, but we'll see.
Let's take a look.
This is Ian with Smoking and Toast, and we're back again with Roy up at Rock Brothers Brewing. So when you gave me your number, you gave me Roy Sip Consultant. Tell me what that's about.
Sip Consulting is a hospitality management company that I own with a couple partners, and basically what we do is layman's term, if you've ever seen John Taffer for Bar Rescue, that's kind of what we can do for you. Cocktail design, staff training, everything from build out to your concept, inventory services. I mean, we pretty much can come in and either help you be a better operator or get you off the ground and up and running for your startup. Nice.
So you can take a bar with no experience and turn them into an operating machine, turn them into something that works.
Of course. I mean, we would do everything from, training your staff, helping you find the right staff, teaching you how to build cocktails, and even menu design. We're pretty limited on food at the moment. We kind of stick towards the spirits end of everything, but we're looking to expand into that in the future.
Excellent. So I noticed that you take your cocktail mixing beyond my level of experience, which is basically rum and Coke or soda and whiskey or whatever. Like if you say the name of it, I can make that happen. But let's see what you got here. You got this Monkey 47. Tell me about this. This is a gin, right?
That's correct. So Monkey 47 is a small batch gin out of Germany. You don't really get a lot of German gins, so definitely a little bit new on the market. And it's lavender forward, so you're not going to get that overpowering juniper, and it's very light and floral, so it really works well for classic cocktails like the Aviator, things like that. The cocktail we're going to be making today is my own twist on the Aviator, just a little bit different, and I'm going to use a flower that's called a Chinese butterfly pea, and it's going to react with the citric acid in the cocktail, and it'll actually change colors. So I call the cocktail Monkey Shines because it's a little bit of a play there.
Clever. I love that. Yeah, German gin I haven't heard of much at all. So it's lavender, and you said would you say it's a little more delicate with the botanicals rather than like juniper's pretty big when you're tasting it. It takes over a lot of flavors.
Yeah, this is definitely a lot more light and floral, so it's going to be a great mixing cocktail for stuff that you don't want that overpowering gin. You want more of just like a nice, soft, delicate cocktail.
Awesome. Show us what you got.
I would normally use the actual dried flowers to create this process, but I don't have any at the moment, so we're going to go with an extract. Works the same, just not as much fun.
The color on that is gorgeous. It's like a deep bluish purple. Looks fantastic already.
It's going to be a nice blue when it's all done. So we'll get there in a second. Can never go wrong with
Chartreuse, right?
So this cocktail is going to go in a coupe.
Shaken, not stirred. That's such a cool color, too.
Yeah, it's blue, but it's going to change colors here in a second.
And you can really smell lavender. So this is going to change colors. Do you want to be our guinea pig on this one? Tell us what you're tasting. Look at that. Look at how that changed to purple. That is gorgeous. Awesome. This is called Monkey Shines, apparently. What is your name?
Megan.
Megan. We're going to have Megan taste this and tell us what she thinks. She's not spitting it out.
It's very floral.
Very floral. Very gin. Floral and tart. There you have it. Thanks, Roy. Appreciate your time. Those are so interesting. All right. Thanks. This is Ian with Smoking and Toast, and we're back again with Roy up at Rock Brothers Brewing. So when you gave me your number, you gave me Roy Sip Consultant. Tell me what that's about.
Sip Consulting is a hospitality management company that I own with a couple partners. And
You're back on.
So what did you think of the drink?
It was incredibly interesting. Incredibly.
Yeah.
Everyone that tried it really liked it. I don't know that it's a go have a whole bunch of them, but it was really interesting. Did you see the way it changed color in the video? Like when he mixes up with Busch, all of a sudden it turns.
It's fascinating. He's got everything a good mixologist needs. He has the knowledge of what he's doing, and then he has the showmanship.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's definitely got that down. Speaking of something you can drink a whole bunch of, that's what made Goose Island 312 Urban Wheat Ale their flagship beer. Is it was something that people, it was a low enough alcohol content, people could drink it in place of drinking a lighter lager like a Budweiser or a Miller. And it is actually, I believe, now the flagship Goose Island beer is the IPA. I think it has overtaken 312. But if you read the book, this is the brew that kind of got everybody going. And if I don't spill it all over myself here, it's the brew that kind of got everybody going and really accelerated Goose Island's growth in Chicago and the surrounding area. And that's what really became their strong point was the 312 just fueled them to the point where they really couldn't make enough of it. In fact, Josh even said in our interview earlier, at one point it was 80% of the production of the brewery, and it was driving them crazy because they were having to cut back on production of the Sofie and the Matilda and the Bourbon County Stout and the stuff that they really, really wanted to be able to use to, continue to further their reputation as a really specialty craft brewery. And it's fascinating because I really think of Goose Island less in terms of those specialty brews and more in terms of the 312 and the Honkers and their pale ale. And really in Chicago, the reputation was built around, it's kind of like you could think of St. Arnold's in terms of the more mainstream beers that they make, the amber and those. But if you really get down to it, they're almost more known now for the Divine Reserve or Bishop's Barrel. That's what really drives people's passion for
That's
the
what
brewery.
people stand in line for.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And it was the same with Goose Island. But 312 was what really put them on the map in bars and at retail and really made them the money that sort of fueled the early growth.
Now, did you ever have
Goose Island.
312 in its heyday, apparently?
Yes. Well, I don't know if it was its heyday. I've had it several years ago. And I will tell you that I'm not as fond of wheat ale as I am of some other styles of beer. So I thought it was good, but it wasn't something that became a go-to for me, even though it's very drinkable and has a little bit of like lemoniness to it, which is very
That
pleasant.
lemon is killing me on this.
Yeah, killing it in a good way or a bad way?
No, not in a good
You're not
way.
liking it. This would not be. I remember thinking at the time of reading the book, if this is the go-to in Chicago, I'm glad that I don't live. Like I would much rather, to my palate, have a Shiner Bock.
I would
have
love
this
to
style of beer.
I would love to have tasted this in the heyday and taste it versus this,
Mm-hmm.
because this Josh also said that this
He
is
said
just a
this is shadow of its former self.
and I believe it. This tastes to me like it could be something interesting, but I mean, there's nothing on the front end that makes this interesting, and there's that slight malt funkiness, or not malt, but slight wheat funkiness on the tail end, and then lemon, and that lemon is frankly annoying.
It's not working for you.
It's not working for me at all.
Goose Island Beer Company, it says on the side, Chicago, Illinois, Baldwinsville, New York, and Fort Collins, Colorado. And what it doesn't go on to say...
We don't know where the heck we're making it. We're just tossing it out the door.
What it doesn't go on to say is brewed in Bud Light tanks in Fort Collins, Colorado, Chicago, Illinois.
Let me be frank, this tastes like it was a good beer that was brewed in Bud Light tanks.
Well, it's a good way of putting it, because had you poured this for me during the light beer challenge, I wouldn't have batted an eye at thinking for a moment that it was any higher quality from a flavor standpoint than any of the light beers we were trying, the Amstel Lights or the others. To me, it's just very random. Like, I much prefer the Honkers Ale.
I way prefer the Honkers Ale over the 312 right now. Like, after this taste, this is not something I'd go out and buy.
Right.
Like, this is not a me thing at all.
I got 5 more bottles if you...
Are you going to put them upside down in a margarita?
Honestly, no, I will not be doing that. Honestly, it's not a bad beer. There just isn't anything about it.
It's not interesting.
Right. There isn't anything about it that I find that interesting.
There's a little bit of that wheat funkiness on the tail end that just it says maybe. But then that lemon hits you and it's like, meh.
If there was something a little more complex about this back in the day, I wish I could have tried this fresh from the tap in the tap room on Fulton Street in Chicago.
Right.
That might have been.
Well,
then I might have understood.
Yeah,
You know
they
what I
also
mean?
talk about in a book the difference in the brewing equipment, how the bigger vats made it much more difficult to get the flavor profile of this particular beer.
That's right. Yeah.
So maybe they're fighting that, and maybe they got as close as they can or whatever. But
This one tastes like they struggled a little bit.
yeah, to me, this is not something I buy again. It's
When we come back, we're going to taste a Goose Island beer that I do not expect you to dislike, or to be even as disappointed in, let's say, as this, because it's something that I've seen you taste before and know that you like.
Yes.
And it's Goose Island Sofie. It's a Saison style beer. It's a Belgian, and it's something I remember you actually flipping out a little bit over.
Well, let me explain to you. I don't have to taste this.
Okay.
But I'm damn sure going to.
We are not only going to taste that, we're going to knock on heaven's door and taste Bob Dylan's Tennessee bourbon.
Hey, 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 yeah.
Just remember, Bob Dylan didn't actually do that.
No, he didn't.
And we'll be right back with a taste of greatness, let's hope, on Smoking and Toasting. It's show number 94, by the way. What's up with that?
Puts us a month and a half away from 100.
I know. So you saw the email go out, right?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is uninteresting, really.
Yeah, both of these taste like
It,
something off about
it actually shows me how spoiled my palate has become.
That's a very valid point.
You know? Because there was a time when I would have thought that was pretty good.
Yeah.
And, you know, even though it's not my favorite style, but particularly with the honkers, I would have said, yeah, that's a really good beer.
Remember when you brought in that Budweiser American Lager?
Mm-hmm.
And we were like, man, it's drinkable. This has a lot of that same quality to it, where that's it. It's drinkable,
very watered down.
but it's watery. It's not.
Yeah.
This doesn't have a nice full flavor profile. Like, it's missing a bunch on the front.
Right.
It has some on the end, but that lemony aftertaste is like sticking in my craw.
Yeah, the first one's I think much better than the other.
Yeah.
Well, I'd just like to say I liked it.
What the fuck?
Woohoo!
You
I like
almost
that.
made me spit my drink at
Is
you.
there a heart in the middle of it?
Yes, it's a
Oh
heart in
my
the middle.
God.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's our second puppet arrived, as if you could.
That's
Oh, mercy.
Well, actually, these ones aren't either of us. Those are common, but they won't be here for a while.
Are you knock?
I'm about to knock.
What the heck? Yeah, some tricks in those bags of yours.
Yes, indeed.
What is all this stuff on the front? Contraptions and whatnot.
Put it up here. Turn around. Let me see.
I think there may be nods to different Bob Dylan lyrics.
Yeah, I was gonna say that would be the clever thing to do.
I'm not sure what's going on there.
You got wheels and chains,
All right. So this will actually be our
and it
final
looks like a
segment,
jack. Why is there a jack turned sideways there?
because Bob Dylan is a hard-working man.
And a drill, maybe?
I'm not sure what's going on there.
Caliper?
I'm not sure I want to know what's going on there, but I do want to taste the whiskey because the whiskey has been very positively reviewed. So, in fact, we will open with the whiskey and we will close with the Sofie.
All right, are we going to do another video, or are we going to save that for next time?
What do you think?
Let's save it for next time. I want to hear about your cigar.
Okay. All right. We do have a few more things to talk about, so that'll work out, actually.
Okay.
Let me know when you're ready.
Ready to go when you are, sir.
On the beach in Hawaii.
Welcome back to Smoking and Toasting. Because we wanted to, devote the proper amount of time to our interview with Josh Noel today, who wrote the Barrel Aged Stout and Selling Out book. We're doing today's show in 4 segments instead of 5. Normally it's 5, but that segment was a little longer than usual. So
it was
today,
great, though.
today will be 4. Oh, I loved talking to him. I found him fascinating. I found his book fascinating, and I recommend it to anybody who is at all interested in craft beer or the history of craft beer, or if you just want an interesting business book. It's a kind of an interesting business book.
Yeah, I downloaded mine right onto my Kindle, and that's nice because then you can read it on any device you have, on any
Yes,
app
I like
you want.
that. Yep.
But it should be available also on an audiobook coming up pretty soon. I would have gotten it on audiobook because I do a lot of audiobooks.
You're
but
an
it wasn't
audiobook
available.
guy, aren't
Yeah,
you?
well, I wear this little earpiece all the time. This little Bluetooth earpiece.
He's one of those.
Right, because I actually feel like a Luddite if I have to put the phone to my head.
Right.
Like, I just don't. I won't talk on the phone if I have to talk to you that way. Like, I'm so far beyond it.
I hold in my hand a bottle of Tennessee bourbon whiskey. This is Heaven's Door. I am now
I knew you were gonna do it. Hold on, do that again. I gotta get.
I like how we're not in sync there. I kind of did that on purpose. It's like when you watch YouTube videos on your TV. Have you noticed this? Like something about watching them on your TV adds just this tiniest bit of lag time. So you hi, or it's like watching those old kung fu movies that are dubbed as a so. You don't think about it, huh? But anyway, let's see if we can get this to sync out right. I want to open this bottle of whiskey and see what. Oh, this
sounds like a creepy old door.
Well, Bob Dylan's not a young man, so
it sounds like Bob Dylan's knees.
Yeah, I don't even know if I'm making any headway here. Yeah, it's and well, this is
you got it.
Somewhat embarrassing because we've never had this much trouble opening a bottle of. And I'm not like exaggerating.
The Angels are not getting their share of that one.
No, they are definitely not. Well, this will be interesting. It's about out of there, as you can see. I don't know if we're going to get the satisfying pop. I think it's just going to be maybe.
Oh, there it was.
But you know that may have actually been worth the worth the wait because
worth the cruise versus the cork.
That was a satisfying pop. Yeah, I may have to let you put the cork back into this thing.
We may have to get a hammer.
I don't know how that's going to work out, but so there are several Bob Dylan whiskeys on the market. This I went with the Tennessee Bourbon, straight bourbon whiskey, but there are several different kinds. The cost of this bottle, I want to say, was about $46. So that's where we are at in terms of the actual cost. If we want to do a little P to Q on this, P to Q is our price to quality ratio that we talk about here on the show. So
the price to quality ratio, that's an important point to me. Like I'm okay with spending a lot of money on something that tastes like it's worth a lot of money. I am not okay with spending a lot of money on something that tastes like I could have bought it for $15 in a plastic bottle.
But I'm not too proud to buy something for $15 in a plastic
bottle. No, if it's good, it's good.
If it's worth the $15 or perhaps even more. So with that in mind, Heaven's Door, and you can see, I'm going to hold this right up close, you can see actually above the words Heaven's Door is the HD Heaven's Door logo.
So I want to say,
Bob Dylan, yeah. And this is
vanilla... cinnamon. There's a lot of cinnamon on the smell on this.
Says here, featuring uncommon blends, special barrel finishes, and rare stocks, Heaven's Door Whiskey is a tribute to the uncompromising spirit within. Small batch collection. They have straight rye, they have double barrel, and they have Tennessee Bourbon. This is the Tennessee Bourbon.
Yeah, so I'm getting, like, just off the smell, I'm getting maple. I'm getting
I like it on the smell.
Like charred oak. I'm getting a sweetness that I can't quite pinpoint. I'm getting
the nose
cinnamon, lots of cinnamon.
Yeah, the nose on this is actually really nice, more complex than I would have expected from a celebrity. Oh, and
this may sound nuts. I may just be crazy, but almost a little bubble gum.
Wow, I've never heard that ascribed to a whiskey before. I'm just going to show the bottle because I was here looking at it like from the back, and you can kind of see through the bottle. There is the Bob Dylan signature on the inside back of the label that you can see through the bottle.
I think that bubble gum is like the sugary sweetness that I'm smelling.
Probably so.
Like, are you smelling this at all? Are you backing me up?
I'm getting a little...
I'm not totally nuts, right?
Yeah, no, it's there. It's not strong, but it's there. Now, again, that's just on the nose.
Like classic bubblegum, like you get out of a baseball cards,
right? And the kind that came with the little cartoon in it.
Yeah.
Okay, so
that's pink. Pink bubblegum
with the sugar stuff visible.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what that makes me. So that and cinnamon. This smells interesting.
I'm going to tell you, the bubblegum doesn't go away once you've taken a sip.
Really? Ha. I'm waiting. Tick.
I actually really like it.
Oh yeah?
Yes.
Bubblegum included?
Bubblegum included, because it's not. That isn't the dominant flavor. You get lots of the sort of maple and vanilla and a little bit of the corn You know, a little
corn.
bit,
There's definitely a lot of corn in that flavor too. You know what? I kind of like it because of that. Though the corn adds a bitter bite to it,
and the bubblegum like
balances.
A little of that
balances a lot of that sweetness that you're smelling.
Bob Dylan, how much bubblegum do you put in your?
You know what's
whiskey?
funny is I don't really smell the corn very much. Like, but it's very present in the flavor.
I didn't get it on the nose at all, but I definitely get it when I'm drinking it. This is complex. Mm-hmm. Actually, more complex than I might have expected.
Yeah, and it's interesting.
Mm-hmm. And it really makes me want a cigar.
It's actually got more heat than a lot of whiskeys we've had in than a lot of whiskeys we've had in this price range.
It has quite a bit of heat. Actually,
yeah, there's no doubt on this. You almost expect it's leaving my mouth water though.
Here's what I'm experiencing now that I've had a couple sips of this. The heat is still resident on the very back of my tongue, but right up by the tip, I'm getting a little bit of that sweetness, that bubblegum sweetness.
I'm gonna do this to you. Okay, take a small sip, ruminate it a little bit, and then I want you to retrohale. And while you're retrohaling, I'm gonna say root beer.
Wow.
Yeah, root beer.
Not on the finish, but on the retrohale.
On the retrohale. Now, the retrohale is, by the way, when you try it, and then you take a nice long breath out of your nose, and you taste different flavors that way. Root beer shows up very prominently right there.
Almost like and this sounds negative in a way that I don't mean, but almost like a root beer candy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Like a root beer flavored hard candy of some sort. This is intriguing and interesting. I have to tell you, I like it.
I'm actually thrilled that we've had this much to talk about.
Yeah, I'm
about. You know what I mean? That it's not just like very straightforward one or two notes. You know.
This is worth having because the bottle is that cool and the whiskey's pretty good.
And it's Bob Dylan. So
Bob Dylan.
You can show people the signature through the bottle here. In general, the whiskey and beer and all the trends of the celebrities getting into this stuff, in general, I find a bit troubling.
Yeah.
But I don't know. This measures up pretty well.
Well, because most of the celebrity stuff is, hey, here's random generic whiskey. It's 40%, blah, blah, blah. Put your name on it. Let's package it, send it out the door.
Hops.
Not too far. Remember a few weeks back I brought the J.R. Ewing one?
Right.
It was actually pretty good.
Yeah. For the price. It was
and
good.
Price point, it was pretty good. I'm surprised.
This is certainly a much better whiskey than the J.R. Ewing.
Yes, it is.
Much better.
Yes, it is. And this is what, only $10 more?
Yeah, I believe it's about $46.
Okay, so $16 more. Now, the J.R. Ewing wasn't bad, and it was less than $30, I think, right at $30, with great packaging. But I feel like I bought a great $25 whiskey with $4 worth of packaging.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm with you. So, all right. So we got a lot going on the show, and I did want to share this one thing with you, which I will do while I'm opening the Sofie. Bell's Two-Hearted Ale deserves our congratulations today, because it has repeated for the second year in a row as the best beer in America, named so by the American Homebrewers Association, and reported in Zmurgy, Z-Y-M-U-R-G-Y, Zmurgy magazine, and their list. And that wasn't, by the way, a Bell's Two-Hearted I was opening. But the brewers of the American Homebrewers Association can discern the subtle differences between a good beer and an outstanding beer, says Director Gary Glass. And this is the second year in a row for Two-Hearted Ale. It comes after they claimed the top spot for an 8-year span with their double IPA, or not their double IPA. The top spot was claimed for 8 years by Pliny the Elder, the double IPA from Russian River. And then Russian River, you may remember, congratulated last year their friends at Bell's with a case of Pliny. And Bell's took the number one spot. And that survey puts Bell's again at number one, Pliny at number two. The rest of the top five, another Bell's. Their double IPA, Hop Slam, came in at number 4 overall. Stowe, Vermont, The Alchemist, their heady topper, was in the top 5, as well as Sierra Nevada's classic American Pale Ale in a 3-way tie with 2 beers from Founders from Grand Rapids, Michigan. So
I just want to point out while you're pouring that Bell's Two Hearted Ale is so good. It is amazing. It is so good, and I will tell you, and I challenge everybody out there: get a Bell's Two Hearted Ale and a rye whiskey.
You've said before that makes a wonderful combination.
I've tried it with a few. My favorite so far is Basil Hayden Rye.
Interesting.
But, man, I don't know why that particular IPA, and IPAs go with ryes pretty well anyway, but that particular IPA and a rye whiskey, they form like Voltron. They make something amazing.
Yes. They form like Voltron. That's good. Form like Voltron. I'm going to quote you on that. That's a good one. So I will say that shortly after we launched the show, I bet we hadn't done more than 2 episodes. So we're at, 96? Yeah. So this has been quite a while ago. Ian and I went over to a place that's across the street from where I live that was having a little Goose Island food pairing tasting event. And while we were there, we enjoyed, I think, the Goose IPA and a couple of the other things, and certainly enjoyed what the chefs had prepared. Had fun talking to the Goose Island rep. He was a super nice guy. And then he brought us a sample of this beer right here. Sofie, one of the specialty brews that Goose Island became beloved in Chicago for brewing. This is one of the ones that really put them on the map with the serious beer aficionados, the beer nerds. The Sofie is a little bit different every year, and it's a Belgian-style saison. And I mention all of this story because it was the first time, I think, that you and I were hanging out that I saw you just absolutely flip out over a beer. Like, you were hugely a fan of the Sofie. So I thought it would be interesting, even though, according to everything that we've read in Josh Noel's book, when AB InBev took over Goose Island, one of the things that happened is the more mainstream beers, the pale, the urban wheat ale, and the honkers, those were the ones that got exported to the other Anheuser Busch breweries, leaving them more room in the Fulton Street Chicago brewery to brew the specialty things like Sofie and their Bourbon County Stout. So the word should be that this beer has not lost any of its original, flavoring or brilliance or dominance. I'm going to be real curious to see what you think of this.
I don't know what it tasted like originally. Yeah. I know what this tastes like now, and this is slightly different from what I remember. That was a year and a half ago or so, or more like that. This is slightly different from that, but just as good. This is a lot of things that I want in a beer. The aroma is huge. The aroma is huge. It's a fruity funkiness.
We were in the middle of something. I think I was telling you about the Bell's story when I opened this, and I immediately got that fruit on the nose just from opening the bottle.
Fruity funkiness of this, and funky. It has this over ripeness going on, but it also has like. On the aftertaste, it has a little bit of under-ripeness going on, and
that's really interesting you say that, and it's absolutely true. Over-ripeness on the front end, and almost some under-ripeness on the back.
Like a little bit too green on the apple, or a little bit too, like the pear's a little too hard, or something like that. But delicious at the same time, and this has so much complexity to it. I truly enjoy a beer like this because it brings so many things. Like, I can sit here and talk about all the different things I'm tasting. This is fantastic.
One of the most interesting things I thought about the book was the description of Greg Hall, who is John Hall, the owner of the original owner of Goose Island, his son, who became the brewmaster, and not because he got the job because he was daddy's boy. He got the job basically by earning his way. He kind of worked his way up through the ranks. But he became the great sort of experimenter of Goose Island. He was the real creative force and the guy that created this beer as well as Matilda and the Bourbon County Bourbon Barrel Stout. He loved to go out and do beer and food pairing dinners, and he would very often do that with this. And in tasting the complexity that's in this beer, you can really see how this would be very interesting going with certain
foods.
This
can instantaneously take the place of any fine white wine.
I think that's right.
That's the flavor profile.
That was actually part of their goal when they were developing these beers at Goose Island.
This is sophisticated enough to keep up with any wine that you wanted to put this in. I mean, it would have to be a pretty outrageous wine to have more interest and profile than this.
So, to summarize on our day, fairly pedestrian on the Honkers Ale, actually a little disappointing on the 312.
Well, hold on, where's my little thing here?
Yeah, you'll find it.
Where is it? It's in there.
Oh, that was different than I was expecting.
No, it's not the one I wanted, but
it
it was close enough.
Yeah. That's what I was expecting. So fairly pedestrian on the Honkers Ale, a little disappointing on the 312. So they're mainstream beers, if you will. We were a little disappointed with, and yet really still knocked out by their more complex by Sofie. Now, I'm going to tell you that we really attempt to do these tastings in as fair a way as possible. I mean, I will tell you that Shiner Bock is a beer that I really enjoy. It's certainly not a complex, like over-the-top, crazy, beer snob beer like this. But I recognize what it represents and where it is. I think for the style that they're doing, it's a really well-crafted and good beer.
They're very drinkable.
If we were drinking that, I wouldn't have said it was just pedestrian. I wouldn't have said I was disappointed. I'd have said, you know what, these guys make a damn fine beer, even if it's not really a Bock. And that's, I guess, the context that I would want to put this whole conversation in, because these are the two beers out of the three we've tried, if you believe what's in the book, that Anheuser-Busch has touched. And the Sofie, not so much. The Sofie remains as delicious as I think we both remember. These two, we were a little disappointed in. So I don't know what that tells you about, one of the things about the book is that Josh really wants you to draw your own conclusions. He doesn't try to make... I was actually going to try in the interview to pin him down, and then I realized that was really one of his points of the book, is... did craft beer win or did craft beer lose?
Yeah.
But you can kind of add that to your thoughts that you're considering as you make your own conclusions. Did craft beer win or lose by big beer getting into the craft arena? I think
what that represents is, if you have some beers like this, craft beer can brew a lot of those things. And a lot of people don't have to have the most consistent craft beer. Mm-hmm. We know from breweries local that the beer can sometimes be a little one way or the other, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's better or worse. It just means sometimes it's a little different.
Mm-hmm.
You're brewing, you're cooking, you're a chef.
Of course, yeah. It's not going to taste exactly the same every time, no matter how hard you try.
Whereas a company like AB InBev structures their entire company around the fact that they brew the exact same beer, the exact same flavor profile everywhere. Mm-hmm. They have a Houston brewery. They have brewery in Colorado. They have breweries everywhere, all over the place. And the liquid comes out the exact same no matter whether. It's an amazing consistency. Mm-hmm. Is that good for beer? Maybe, but not for craft beer, I think. Because we're allowed to have a little inconsistency.
It's really comparable. If you go to McDonald's and order the quarter pounder with cheese, you're happy that it tastes like exactly what you expected the quarter pounder with cheese.
Right, whether you're in Newark or whether you're in Washington.
In fact, one of the complaints you'll get from people who are Americans who travel into Europe is they stopped at a McDonald's and it didn't taste right.
Okay. If you're an American and you're traveling to Europe,
why are you stopping at McDonald's? I know. But the larger point, though, is this. You can go to a chef's restaurant, and sometimes the dishes aren't going to taste exactly like they tasted perhaps the last time you ordered them. And that's because there's more freedom of expression and experimentation going on.
Right.
And so the same is really true for craft beer. And with that, I think we will wrap our discussion of Goose Island and Anheuser-Busch and the crazy story of big beer taking over smaller beer. Or as the book says, Goose Island, Anheuser-Busch, and how craft beer became big business. I recommend the book highly, and it was a little longer show than usual today, but I really enjoyed talking to Josh, and I really enjoyed doing these tastings, and I even enjoyed knocking on heaven's door. Have a great week, my friends, and enjoy whatever you're drinking, wherever it's made. And, of course, as we always like to say, cheers.
Cheers.